There are more people out there we should be concerned about. Hope you can all get a seat. Yes, there are a few seats left. You just wait for any latecomers. Hello, I'm Megan Mitchell. I'm the National Children's Commissioner, and I'm really honoured to be here today to be able to host the launch of this report, CRC25, Australian Child Rights Progress Report. But before we begin proceedings, I'd like to ask Uncle Alan Madden to conduct the welcome.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Alan Madden, Gadigal Elder. For all you followers that haven't read this report, I'll start it off on. Make for some good reading, wouldn't it? First of all, two apologies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, two apologies for the terrible weather we're having outside at the moment. Sorry. And not being able to welcome you to my country and my language, as we're forbidden to talk our language a long time ago. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, and pay my respects to all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from. Welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. As I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. There'll be three things surer than that: coming, taxation, and going. It is an honour and a pleasure to be here today to welcome one Lord of Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own. The Hawkesbury River to the north, the mobs up that way call it the Darkinjung, the Pean to the west, the Derrabin, and Georges River to the south, Kaimai. And in between those three mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans. And the clan's name we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old saying out there, and I think it's very appropriate for you mob here today. You've always heard it 1,000 times before. They say where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of the Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Alan Madden, for being here and welcoming us in such a warm and humorous way. And I'd too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. There are far too many distinguished guests in the audience tonight. You know who you are. But I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge our eminent speakers for this event: Rory Blundell, Judge Alister Nicholson, Professor Deborah Brennan, and also, of course, Adrian Graham. I would also like to thank the National Child Rights Taskforce, which is a collective driving force of non-government agencies behind this progress report that we're launching here today. In this context, I especially acknowledge the respective CEOs of the organisations that act as co-chairs or convene the task force. Adrian Graham from UNICEF, one of those organisations, and Matthew Keeley from the National Children and Youth Law Centre as the other co-convening organisation. And of course, my thanks to all the worker bees that have made today possible and let us sit up here and stand up here and take all the glory. So especially Tara, Aaron, Emily and Romana. So thank you to all of you. As many of you, as you would know, I was appointed as Australia's first National Children's Commissioner in early 2013, and with the job of monitoring and promoting the rights of all children in Australia. And in large part, this was the result of many years of lobbying by people in this room. And the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which underpins the work that I do, is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. And its articles and principles are at the heart of what I do as National Children's Commissioner. The Convention recognises the vulnerability of children, means that their human rights require special protection, but it also recognises their agencies as evolving human beings. It's been over 25 years since Australia ratified the Convention, and in doing so, it committed to protect and uphold the rights of every child in Australia. So this report provides a timely evaluation of Australia's implementation of the Convention. In 2018, Australia is due to submit its combined 5th and 6th periodic reports to the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child, and that's the committee that monitors the implementation of the Convention and its optional protocols. The committee's concluding observations on Australia's last progress report in 2012 demonstrated that although we have made some positive progress, there is still significant work to be done to fulfil and implement the Convention and protect the rights, especially of our most vulnerable children. We know that the rights of children and young people hold, that the rights they hold under the Convention are intrinsic to their well-being and healthy development. The Convention's domains cover all the basic conditions that need to be met for children to go well and do well in life, like being safe, having a caring family, getting a good education, having good health, being able to get help, being treated fairly and justly, knowing their identity and maintaining connections to culture. So, as such, the Convention provides us with an important benchmark for measuring how well we are providing for the needs of our children. In my job, I take every opportunity to talk to children and young people about their rights and to remind adults that they have a responsibility to ensure that children can fully realise their rights. I've used the role to highlight particular issues where children in Australia are especially vulnerable, such as in relation to suicide and self-harm, children's exposure to high levels of domestic and family violence, and their experiences of bullying, exploitation and abuse. And I've used my annual reports to Parliament to expose these and other priority issues facing Australian children in today's world. And this year I'm focusing on the needs of and treatment of children in juvenile detention and examining its existing oversight mechanisms as we progress towards potential, hopefully, ratification of the protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, Degrading Treatment and Punishment, something I have strongly recommended. The Australian Child Rights Progress Report, or CRC 25 for short, reflects on progress against a range of domains contained in the Convention, including the priorities I've sought to highlight in my own work. And it makes a number of recommendations to advance children's rights in Australia. However, without an Australian Bill of Rights, without laws that adequately support child rights, without a federal minister with responsibility for children, and without a national plan or budget focusing on children and their development, it is left to networks like the Child Rights Taskforce, its members and supporters, to do the heavy lifting for Australian kids. And as is emphasised in the report's recommendations, in order to fully realise children's rights, we need active and systematic consideration of their interests in the development of our laws, policies and practices. And most importantly, we need to listen to what children and young people have to say as an intrinsic part of those processes and considerations, and learn from and incorporate their input all along the way. In this sense, the Convention is also critical to children as a tool for enabling their voices to be heard. In turn, being visible and heard is the gateway to realising all other rights. I have found that letting children know about the Convention and their human rights is incredibly empowering for them. The rights in the Convention are like pieces of armour they can put on that protects them and makes them strong. The Convention is an important signal to children and young people that adults care so much about them that they have promised, at least in theory, to make sure every child can realise their rights. The children and young people I have spoken to throughout my term as Children's Commissioner have consistently shown a clear understanding of the world around them. They have profound insights and brilliant ideas, no matter how young or old they are, no matter where they come from, or whether their families are rich or poor. They also have a great desire to have a say in the matters that affect them. It's up to all of us to continue to advocate for mechanisms and platforms to deliver this to each and every one of them. So without further ado, to provide an assessment of how well we are faring in advancing children's rights and to reflect on Australia's journey in the implementation of children's rights today, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, the Honourable Alistair Nicholson. Throughout his distinguished career as a barrister and judicial officer, and following his so-called retirement, Alistair has worked tirelessly and passionately to promote the well-being of children and he's currently the chair of Children's Rights International, and today he will give us a bit of an overview of the first 25 years of the Convention on the Rights of the Child in Australia. Alistair Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Megan, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to join in acknowledging the Gadigal people, the Audit Commission, and I was impressed with Alan's introduction. I commend the former owners. I'm sorry, I mixed up with that one. I commend the I'm sorry, I'm slightly embarrassed at that, but anyway, I'll try again. The traditional owners of the land and their elders, past and present, and I think that is the first time I've ever mucked up that introduction. So, and I do apologise to the original people present for having done so, but I suppose it's always the first time. Now, today I'm speaking about the report of the Australian Children's Rights Taskforce, and I'd like to acknowledge the two co-chairs of it, Deborah Brennan and Aaron Choi, from UNICEF and NCYLC, who've done a great job in pulling this together as an excellent report. It indicates a number of areas of progress over the last 25 years, as you hope it would, but it also highlights serious deficiencies in our national performance. And I think that's where I would like to comment today, because I think the deficiencies it has highlighted are so serious that it needs a lot of attention. It's an important document providing a much needed measure of where we stand, written from an independent point of view. I commented in my opening remarks, published in the report, as you have, that it makes uncomfortable reading for Australians, as did the 2012 report by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child about Australia's performance. And I suspect that the next report of the UN Committee will also be highly critical unless a lot changes in the meantime. The report of that committee expressed concern that the absence of a comprehensive national plan of action, a comprehensive strategy in consultation with the children of civil society, for the overall realisation of principles and provisions of the Convention, which could provide a framework for states and territories to adopt similar plans and strategies. That was a very serious and important recommendation which seems to have fallen on deaf ears in this country. As this report points out, in line with the UN recommendation, there is a lack of proper planning, particularly to address the position of children most in need. It points to the fact that certain groups of children and young people consistently face barriers to enjoying their rights and reaching their full potential, including, of course, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, children who are seeking asylum who have refugee status, children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, children with disability, LGBTI children, homeless children, and children from rural areas. And that's just a few of them. There are, but you can see, I think, the breadth of the deficiencies that we face. And at present, there's no federal minister with direct responsibility for children or youth. Thus, the government does not engage in even a veiled pretense to include the voices of youth and children in decisions that affect them, which has become particularly clear in the defunding of dedicated children and youth organisations and peak bodies. It's true, of course, that we now have a distinguished commission for children, but the issues facing children are vast and cannot hope to be dealt with by one person with limited staff, as she's already pointed out. So I therefore commend the report's conclusions that what is needed is to assign a Commonwealth Ministry with lead responsibility for policy regarding children and young people and the development of a national plan for all children in Australia, for the overall realisation and implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be still in the same position the next time this comes around. I also consider that such a ministry ought to be led by a minister with no other responsibilities, so that she could devote their entire attention to children's issues. This surely isn't an unreasonable approach, given Australia's historic role in the negotiation of the Convention and its solemn ratification of it, and the importance of children in our society generally. Perhaps a properly motivated government might also consider developing a priority list of issues raised by reports like this one, setting up clear accountabilities as to responsible departments in relation to such issues alongside or as part of a national plan. One would hope that the report of an Australian group such as this, convened by highly respected Australian NGOs, will not be easily vilified, brushed off or ignored. But sadly, the typical Australian political response to UN and other criticisms is to brush them off and or attack the members of the committee that made them. I was reflecting when preparing these remarks on the election campaign to date, and the failure of either of the major parties to take up issues relating to disadvantaged children. It seems that it's okay for politicians to pay lip service to the importance of children and young people, while at the same time doing little to or nothing to address their needs. And when you think back over the years, it's a pretty impressive picture. Remember Bob Hawke saying that no child will live in poverty? That might have been a fairly impossible aspiration, but at least it was an aspiration that hasn't been shown much since. These considerations give little cause for confidence that any Australian government will pay heed to this report's recommendations, despite the fact that they're clearly sound. But I hope I'm not being unduly pessimistic about this, and it might even be that the report being issued in the middle of an election campaign might at least cause some people to have a look at it and perhaps see what they might do. And so let's hope so anyway. While I agree with the report's recommendations as to a national plan and specific setting up of a ministry for children, I don't believe that goes far enough either. I think that specific legislation is also required, and I believe the only way in which proper recognition can be given to the Convention is for the Commonwealth to pass legislation incorporating it into Australian law. It clearly has the constitutional power to do so because of the treaty power, and if it's serious about advancing the interests of Australian children, it would do so. I say this because I believe that this is the only way, for example, that we can ever address issues like the appalling number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children held in detention, issues of child poverty and inequality of opportunity, uses of the child protection system, and the many other issues where the Commonwealth and the states and territories are either contravening the CRC or lagging behind in implementing it. Now, maybe that's a pipe dream, but it seems to me that if nothing is done in this regard, how are we ever going to deal with the recalcitrant states, territories like the government of the Northern Territory, I don't care which political party seems to be running it, or Western Australia, or Queensland still sentences 17-year-olds as adults. How are we ever going to deal with those matters unless the Commonwealth takes responsibility for them? And it seems to me that's really what should happen, and it's almost a first step. And let's not forget that most countries who ratify the convention also include it as part of their domestic law. Even countries like Cambodia, Vietnam included it as part of their domestic law, and they're hardly bastions of freedom, but by the same token, there is at least a recognition of its importance. I now turn to some specific issues raised by the report about I think everyone in this country, particularly its political leaders, should be deeply ashamed. And I think the first is the treatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. I've already mentioned the disgraceful detention rates of these children. The chronic changes to bail laws in criminal justice systems throughout Australia have led to many more children being unnecessarily incarcerated. Similarly, two-strikes laws in Western Australia and the Northern Territory have exacerbated the problem, particularly for Aboriginal children, but for all children. As recently as May 2016, would you believe, the Northern Territory legislature introduced an amendment to the Bail Act, introducing a presumption against bail to extend to persons that are arrested and have been previously convicted of 2 or more serious property crimes within the past 2 years. And this is in a territory where the imprisonment rate is shocking, and many times the rate of other parts of Australia. Frank Brennan pointed out in a recent article that was introduced against a background where the figures show that in 2013, I think later figures are worse than this, the national imprisonment rate was 170 prisoners per 100,000. For the Northern Territory, 821 per 100,000, of whom 86% were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Now, that in itself is a condemnation of the government of the Northern Territory, but it's also a condemnation of the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth, if it has no other powers, can at least control what happens in the Northern Territory, and if it hasn't sought to do so, it wouldn't even have to incorporate the Convention on the Rights of the Child to exercise powers there, but of course it would in relation to the states. It's little wonder, as Frank Brennan also pointed out, that Pat Dodson, in his recent address to the National Press Club, said, "For the vast bulk of Aboriginal people, the legal system is not a trusted instrument of justice. It is a feared and despised processing plant that propels the most vulnerable and disabled of our people to a broken and bleak future." I couldn't agree more. The area of child protection also severely affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, who are, again, heavily overrepresented in out-of-home care, and where siblings are often separated in such circumstances. Separation of siblings, I say, is common throughout the child protection system in Australia. And it's unbelievable to me that it should be so, because it's quite wrong and contrary to all child protection principles, and yet it seems to be perfectly accepted, or at least not avoided enough. And I think also, and allied with this, and they can be conscious of this as well, in applying to all children, is the recent changes to some state child protection systems, including Victoria and New South Wales, have further exacerbated the difficulties of children generally, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in particular, by imposing restrictive time periods for the making of final dispositions as to where and with whom the child is to live. Now, we all know that with problem families, you can't impose those sorts of restrictions, because that needs to be worked out over a period. And it's absurd and restrictive to impose those restrictions. And often the final decisions as to where the child will live is not uncommonly made by bureaucrats rather than by child protection courts. And that's one of the criticisms of recent Victorian legislation. Of course, the next area I touch on is the criminal justice system generally, insofar as it affects children. I note the report urges that all legislation in each state and territory should provide that detention should occur as a last resort for any person up to and including the age of 17. Now, there's a fairly uneven approach to this issue across the states and territories. Queensland, for example, treats 17-year-olds as adults, as I've mentioned. Detention rates are very high in Western Australia and Northern Territory, very low in Victoria, South Australia and the ACT. And paradoxically, for those who support the sort of punishment approach towards children, the rate of reoffending in those states is much lower. So that the system works when you don't put people into detention. In fact, the studies show that children who are not detained are much less likely to offend in the future than children who are detained. So it just doesn't make sense to start behaving like the governments of the Northern Territory and others are. The report also correctly criticises legal aid for children, and as was also noted by the Productivity Commission, it suggests increased funding to community legal centres and other relevant organisations for this purpose. Community legal centres have been the target, particularly of the federal government, for many years, and they've been reduced to a shadow of what they were. And yet they are one of the most important protections for children, and young people, and citizens generally in relation to issues of the law. And then, of course, legal aid again is an area that's also been cut, and again, very often the poor and children suffer most. And of course, all states and territories are in breach of the Convention in relation to the age of criminal responsibility. Children in our states are presumed to be capable of committing crimes at the age of 10. I just find that an unbelievable situation that we retain that attitude in a modern country. The Convention, of course, prescribes 14. But why do we think that we're going to succeed in punishing children between the age of 10 and 14 in the courts, when really they're so undeveloped in their capacity that it's not the approach to, and all the science tells you it's not the approach. It's a very puzzling issue. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'll just turn to what I regard as the most significant blight on Australia's international reputation. That's our treatment of asylum seekers, and particularly children. I'm not a recent critic of this approach. I think I first made a public attack on the government, that's the Labor government, in 1995 for running a concentration camp at Port Hedland, so I so describe it. And I noticed that that's an expression that is supposed to be very unfair, but I don't think it is. I think when we look at what we've done, that's just what we've been doing. Not extermination camps like the Germans used to run, there are concentration camps like the British founded in South Africa, and that's not one of their proudest efforts either. But if you look at the special rapporteur on torture, which is quoted in the report, which is one of many several reports, by failing to provide adequate detention conditions, hinder the practice of detention of children, and put a stop to the escalating violence and tension at the regional processing centre, Australia has violated the right of the asylum seekers, including children, to be free from torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. I've never expected my country to be criticised for creating circumstances which have been described by senior UN officials as torture. There's no doubt that this is what we've done and what we're doing. We seem to have lost all empathy for people, including children in distress. I recently read a book by, in the process of reading a book by Eva Horner on asylum seekers, and she also refers to this lack of empathy, this complete turning off of any understanding of what we're doing to these people. But we've forgotten that apart from our first peoples, we're a nation of immigrants, and many of their forebears came here looking for asylum, perhaps not as formally as they do now, but they certainly came here in that way. And for us to behave in this way to modern asylum seekers is just reprehensible. I think the problem stems from a failure of leadership in this country, which has led us leaders to adopt practices and processes that have been previously unheard of in civilised society for the purpose of short-term political gain. It must be shared between all political actors and successive governments over the course of decades. It's always been a bipartisan policy, except for brief and unsuccessful attempts to seek other solutions. But in many ways, it has turned, I believe, this country into an international crime. I hope our leaders feel proud when the right-wing government of Austria announced last week it was adopting a similar policy. And what an example for Australia to offer the world that was. And for a contrast in leadership, consider Angela Merkel's approach in Germany. There's a real leader. She's attempting to find durable solutions for refugee children and their families on a much greater scale than has ever presented itself as a problem here. We've never faced the problems that they're facing, and yet, and we do in fact accept 200,000 people as immigrants each year, but only about 12,750 on humanitarian grounds, which was reduced by the government from a previous level of 20 that is the previous if we'd accepted 50,000 people a year during this exercise, it would have been only a quarter of our 200,000 intake, and we would have had a much better chance of entering into cooperative arrangements with other countries in the region and UNHCR. And I suggest that these problems that we now face would never have arisen, and the misery that's been caused by them would never have occurred. Instead, successive governments have relied on holding asylum seekers as hostages in remote, grossly under-resourced and developing client states such as Nauru and PNG as a means of stopping the boats. Endless crocodile tears have been wept by ministers about the loss of life at sea and how they prevented this, which must, I think, be the ultimate in cynical hypocrisy. Their aim has not been to save lives at all, but to use existing asylum seekers as hostages to persuade potential asylum seekers to go somewhere else, but they don't care whether they die there or not. And that really typifies Australia's attitude. And the amendments to the Migration Act enable a successful pursuit of a policy of refinement cruelty and are a most critical picture to numerous conventions and international law generally. And it's an ongoing problem. I mean, every time there appears to be some softening in government attitudes, it's always a catch. The cohort of children brought back here post-December 2014 on the Bringing Them Back campaign remain ineligible to apply for Australian visas. They're still classified as transitory persons. They and their families are still eligible to be returned to Nauru at any time, to win with the minister, and they can't get on with building their lives. And the babies, the subject of the baby Farouz case before the High Court, are still in limbo too. They at least are able to apply for a visa, but 18 months on, none of those 113 children and their families have been processed. And currently, I understand about 28,000 people in Australia, including children, are still waiting on this so-called processing. If we spend billions on these camps to hold people, we don't seem to be able to spend the money on staff to do what a sensible government would do. And of course, the secrecy that now surrounds the exercise, protected by the law to the point where whistleblowers are likely to be prosecuted and imprisoned. In both Nauru and Manus, there have been avoidable deaths of asylum seekers, and many have been subject to sexual and other assaults. So the reason for the secrecy, I suppose, is obvious. It's probably what the Nazi Germans did and what other totalitarian regimes did as well. That is, there's a lot to hide. And our government seems to recognise the absence of letting journalists in, the prohibition of letting journalists into this place. I think is very clear evidence of the complicity and guilt of our government. I'll conclude by saying I don't like to be ashamed of my country as I am. I think there's been a monumental failure of leadership in relation to human rights. This has to be, and this has been accepted as the norm. But without courage, curiosity, and principled leadership from our future leaders, we have a bleak future. I do remain heartened that we still have people like William Triggs, William Burnside, Frank Brennan, Nicky Mitchell, and many other deeply dedicated people across the NGO sector and elsewhere. I think they provide the still hope that Australia can return to its rightful place as a humanitarian and decent country. So I welcome the launch of this report and hope that this may be a small step, or perhaps a big step, towards Australia pointing in the right direction.
Thank you, Alistair, for that insightful summation of how far yet we have to go before we can really say we uphold children's rights, and that how many areas where we continue to breach both in letter and spirit children's rights in this country and offshore as well. And so that's very sobering for us, but I do think that in this room there's lots of conviction and courage and principle, and I think there are lots of leaders in this room that do work together and will continue to work together to take us to a place where we are proud of what we do for children in this country. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Professor Deborah Brennan. Deborah has extensive research and policy experience in early childhood education and care, gender and family issues. And today we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to hear her discuss the critical issue of access to quality early childhood education, and from my perspective, this is a child rights issue.
Thanks very much, Megan. I'm honoured to be part of the launch of CRC 25 and to have a few moments to speak about children's right to quality early education and care. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. And thank you, Alistair, for hesitating on those words because that ensured that I did. I'd also like to congratulate the 3 organisations that developed the recommendations relating to the early childhood policy domain in this report. And they are SNAKE, the Secretariat of National, Aboriginal and Islander Childcare, Early Childhood Australia and UNICEF. The recommendations relating to early childhood in the report are concise, they're focused, and they're clearly based in a deep understanding of what is required to align early years policy with the rights of children. In a moment, I'm going to say a little bit about just a few of the recommendations relating to early childhood. But first, I'd like to note, as the report does, that Australian governments have in fact taken several initiatives in the last decade to establish secure foundations for quality early education and care. And so it's important, I think, that we give credit where it's due in this particular sphere. So the introduction of a national quality agenda and an early years learning framework are a couple of those initiatives. And both the agenda and the framework make explicit reference to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is really good. So the National Quality Agenda refers to the obligation of all those who work with children to protect them from harm, respect their dignity and privacy, and safeguard and promote every child's well-being. And the Early Years Learning Framework also refers to the principles of the Convention, in particular the principle that all children have the right to an education that lays a foundation for the rest of their lives. The Early Years Framework is also based in one of the Convention's principles, which is that children have a right to play and a right to be active participants in all matters affecting their lives. So through these measures, and some others as well, governments and the sector have given explicit support to the principles of the Convention. But supporting the principles is one thing, and the challenge now, of course, and the report makes this very clear, is to make these principles meaningful by lifting the participation of all children in high quality early education and care. And in turn, this means taking very active measures to promote the participation and engagement of those who are currently missing out. And the children missing out, not surprisingly, are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, children with disabilities, children from immigrant and refugee backgrounds, and more generally, children from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So this brings us to the recommendations in the report. There are 8, and I'm just going to briefly mention 3. Recommendation 1 calls on governments to ensure that every child has access to 2 days of quality early education per week in the year before school. And recommendation 2 calls for children who are vulnerable to have access to at least 2 days subsidised quality early learning from birth for the first few years. And these two are obviously very closely related, so I'll consider them together. Those of you who are familiar with the early childhood sector, and some of you who are not as well, may be aware that since 2009, all Australian governments have had a commitment to universal access to preschool education. And that was introduced as part of Australia's human capital agenda in 2009. So if we've got that policy, why in 2016 do we need these recommendations that appear in the report? Well, the short answer is that while considerable progress has been made towards this goal, access still remains very uneven, both geographically, with some states doing much better and investing much more than others, and also uneven in terms of the groups that have most and least access. So on the most recent figures, 74% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are enrolled in preschool with, in the year before starting school, with 70% actually attending. And that compares with 91% enrolment and 89% attendance amongst non-Indigenous children. Family income also plays a very big role in mediating access to childcare and early learning. In families with a combined weekly income of $2,000 or more than half of all children, and this is 0 to 14-year-old children, regularly participate in formal services, and that compares with just 25% of children in families with a weekly income of $800 or less. So these figures don't reflect a system that is oriented to the rights of children, regardless of what some formal policy documents might say. Another reason that these two recommendations are pertinent is the ongoing tension between the twin goals of early childhood education and care. And the twin goals are, first, promoting children's well-being, learning and development, and second, facilitating parents' participation in the labour force. This is an enduring tension in early childhood policy, and at various times in our history, Australia has swung towards one pole or the other. Right at the moment, we seem to be very firmly in the parents' participation in the labour force pole. Because there are mooted changes to policy for which legislation has already been drafted that would exclude children from subsidised services unless their parents, and that's both parents if there are two parents, participate in the labour force for a minimum number of hours a fortnight. Measures that seek to exclude children from access to early childhood education and care on the basis of their parents' workforce participation clearly violate the principles of the Convention. Not only that, but they will take Australia in the opposite direction to international best practice. The UK, for example, now provides 15 hours free early childhood education and care to every 4-year-old, every 3-year-old, and about half of 2-year-olds, regardless of their parents' workforce status or income. And a similar policy prevails in New Zealand. Recommendation 3, the last one I'll mention, calls for sustainable and ongoing block funding to integrated early childhood services that support improved outcomes for vulnerable families. Now, what that really refers to is a group of really important services that provide community-led programs, mainly but not exclusively to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. These services stand outside the market-driven model that dominates early childhood education and care in Australia, and they're tremendously important, not only to the families and children and communities they serve, but to the rest of us, I think, as a beacon of community-driven service provision. These services address the needs of children in a holistic way, in a context of cultural safety, active understanding of and respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander identity. They build on community strengths and they address a wide range of physical, social, emotional and learning needs, far wider than can be addressed in mainstream early education and care. And I think the fact that they are so strongly based in cultural and social strengths is a welcome counter to the endless, if necessary, recitation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander disadvantage. These services clearly build on the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which calls on governments to ensure that services are tailored to the circumstances of particular groups and individuals and reflect the needs and characteristics of the communities to which they're connected. And they provide, as I've said, wonderful models of community engagement, despite the fact that they are pathetically poorly resourced and are excluded from the National Quality Framework. It's a really important recommendation. So just to sum up, important steps have been taken in Australia to build the quality of early education and care. These steps are a foundation, but there's a long way to go before we're giving full expression to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We need to build on the evidence base that shows that the greatest benefits of quality education flow to children who start life at a disadvantage. We need stronger measures to reduce barriers to access, whether they're cost, transport, cultural awareness, or whatever they are. And I noticed that in the last few weeks, media and politicians are putting a big emphasis on financing measures in childcare. And certainly financing is really important. It is indeed the bedrock of an accessible and inclusive system. But subsidies are certainly not the whole story. If we are to address the needs of all children in Australia, we can't do this simply by reducing or even eliminating fees. In order to provide safe and welcoming environments for children, including Aboriginal, especially including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, we need substantial investments, not only of cash, but also of thought, planning, community engagement, and professional time. If we can move in this direction, we may be able finally to move away from the notion that children are simply units of human capital and acknowledge in our policies and forms of provision that children are human. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brennan. You so expertly articulated the importance of seeing early childhood education as a rights issue that not only provides work and family choice, which is where most of the discussion and debate seems to be at the moment, but also serves to safeguard children and to promote their healthy learning and development. And that's, it does get up my core too, that the debate is not one that puts children's needs first. They have to compete for in a policy space in that way. So thank you very much. I now have the privilege of introducing Rory Blundell, who at such a young age has already been on an incredible journey of personal growth and development. And through the story that Rory has to tell, has much to teach us, I'm sure. In this context, Rory contributed a reflection about childhood experiences of identifying as transgender to today's report. Rory lives in Melbourne. He's studying sociology, working and volunteering with Minus 18, as well as other organisations and community groups, and obviously here in his spare time to talk to us. So over to you, Rory.
Thank you. I too would also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and extend my respect to elders both past and present. As we've already covered, my name is Rory. I'm 20 years old and I identify as a transgender guy. I'm originally from Sydney, but I moved to Melbourne down there for studying and also to volunteer with Australia's largest LGBTI youth organisation, Minus 18. I first of all just want to say what a privilege it is to speak here, and I'm just amazed by the amount of involvement and energy that has gone into this report. And I can't believe I am here now. Looking at me now from my high school perspective, I would not believe I had this opportunity. What's the confidence to speak to all of you as an openly trans young person? As we probably all of you have seen, the LGBTI community has made amazing strides in acceptance and equality in the past 10 years. However, LGBTI young people have one of the highest rates of mental health rates in the country, with trans young people being the most vulnerable demographic to suicide. The average age of a first attempt, according to a recent Beyond Blue study, is 16. Most of the time, that's before coming out to friends and family. And we still don't have statistics that accurately reflect it, so we imagine it's actually much more. LGBTI young people as a whole have been represented pretty interestingly in the media. I want to emphasize that these mental health rates are not a reflection of being LGBTI. We're living in a society where we are not respected, we are underrepresented, and are not supported in being ourselves. Recently, political jargon surrounding the Safe Schools Coalition and also the marriage equality plebiscite has used language that sexualizes, says we are inappropriate, confused, abnormal, with one MP that I won't name actually equalizing talking about LGBTI topics in schools as pedophilia and child grooming. This just emphasizes the importance of community organisations like -18 in here in Sydney 2010 and Safe Schools, but also more importantly, community support and awareness. Today, legally, if I wanted to change my ID, and it would have to be in New South Wales, I would have to undergo surgery. New South Wales, in the Marriage Act, in the New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages, recognise trans people as people living as the opposite sex and who have undergone a sexual affirmation procedure. For young people under 18, it requires parental consent from parents who may or may not be supportive of their child, going through family court and a psychiatric diagnosis of gender identity disorder. This is to access life-saving treatment. This process not only relies on a binary conception of gender that actually makes it almost impossible for those who identify as gender diverse, but of course infinitely harder for LGBTI young people who are neurodivergent or have a disability. I know I focus on the negative, and I'm going to try and steer away from that, because the media often presents trans people as a bit of a sob story, that we are trapped in our own bodies and that we are inherently suffering. And this is not true. Working in community organisations with young people has just shown me the amount of activism and passion and hope that there is in this community. Recently, -18 had our same-sex and gender diverse formal. Conservatives tried to buy out all the tickets so the young people can go to protect the children. And as you may have heard, we actually called for donations so we could give these tickets out for free. And we raised over $40,000 in 2 days. Over 550 young people went to that event, and many described it as life-changing. I just want to emphasize that this change is all done by young people. And I know that the change we've seen in the past 10 years is only indicative of the change we have to come. And I believe with the support of all our communities, the future for LGBTI young people is so, so bright. Thank you.
I think that says a lot about the power of young people and the insights that they have into themselves. And then we can never forget the fact that they're the expert in their own lives. You know, we have views, but, you know, really we should be entering into a dialogue with them because they're the ones who know the solutions that work for them. I think Rory is an example of that, and all power to them. And just to complete proceedings, I want to now invite Adrian Graham, the Acting CEO of UNICEF Australia, to conclude today's event and to officially launch the report. Graham. Adrian.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. I too would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay respect to elders, past, present, and emerging, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, particularly Uncle Aaron. Thank you for your welcome today. On behalf of the Child Rights Taskforce, UNICEF Australia, and our co-convener, Matthew Keeley of the National Children's and Youth Law Centre, thank you so much for joining us here today to reflect on 25 years of the Convention of the Rights of the Child in Australia. Anniversaries provide an opportunity to mark our progress in protecting and promoting child rights, and to consider the continued exclusion of some children in Australia in benefiting from progress and prosperity. Australia is not the lucky country for many children and their families. The well-being and development of children growing up in Australia must be shaped by sound leadership and policy choices, as Judge Nicholson referred to earlier. The Convention is intended to be a framework to ensure that all children can fully realise their rights and fulfil their potential. This report highlights the children in Australia who most persistently face barriers to enjoying their rights and reaching their full potential, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, children who are seeking asylum or have refugee status, children and young people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, children with disability, and LGBTI children. Thank you, Judge Nicholson, who travelled from Melbourne to share his expansive professional knowledge and insights today. I'm glad it's today and not last Friday. The weather might not be as well. As you noted, the rate and impact of child poverty is deeply concerning, in particular within our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. Despite 2 decades of consecutive economic growth, 1 in 6 children still live below the poverty line, and there is an absence of cohesive policy discussion or response to address this trend. I also note from your comments, Judge Nicholson, the fact that a coordinated action plan for children has largely fallen off the map. This is a sobering thought for us all, and is also not a major talking point of this current election campaign. Stronger links between the CRC and Australian legislation, both state and federal, is critical. Courage and principled leadership is also critical to return Australia to its rightful place as a good global citizen. Thank you also to Professor Deborah Brennan for providing compelling evidence on the profound importance of access to quality early education and care. It's heartening to hear that some progress has been made, a foundation, as you say, but we still have a long way to go. The earlier years are a period of both tremendous opportunity and great vulnerability. Access to quality early education care affects almost everything that comes next for children as they grow and mature. And particularly thanks to Rory, who talked here today, and Melinda, who contributed in our report, through sharing their personal experiences of growing up in Australia. Personal reflection, Rory, is such an inspiration to our community and young people. Seriously well done. Melinda articulated how our social and cultural identity is sacred, particularly for children. Connection to your culture and your country are protective factors that enable children to grow up well in Australia. Rory spoke to continued discrimination amongst many LGBTI young people and what they continue to experience, and the importance of being able to express your identity and views safely. In addition to those people that Judge Nicholson mentioned and some of our other presenters today, many people contributed to the report's compilation with leadership from the steering committee of the Child Rights Taskforce, particularly Emma Sidman and Fleur Smith of SNAPE, the Human Rights Law Centre, NATSLs, James McDougall, Alison Elliott, and Angela Moore. A special thanks to you, Commissioner Mitchell, and your colleagues for hosting us today. UNICEF Australia values our continued and collaborative relationship with the Commission, and we acknowledge the unique and critical role of national human rights institutions in protecting the rights of children. When the Australian government ratified the CRC, we made a clear commitment to children. That we have no formal implementation framework or coordinating body after 25 years is unacceptable. It means that some children will continue to get left behind. The Child Rights Taskforce, through this report, have identified a clear need for a comprehensive national policy agenda for children that includes measures to ensure that all children growing up in Australia have a decent quality of life, adequate social safety nets, and are protected from poverty, discrimination, and social exclusion. Thanks for joining us here today. We will circulate an email shortly to registered attendees that will include a link to the full version of the report. Please do take a good read of it. Please now join us for some refreshments outside. Thank you very much.